So Bluey is a thing. I don't know if you've heard about this one. It's a children's show, but the internet is freaking out over it. And this time it's not just the millennials and Gen Zs going crazy because of the music of the Backyardigans. The music in that show did go way harder than it needed to, though. No, this time it's less about remembering and nostalgia, because Bluey isn't an old cartoon, nor is it a reboot of Blue's Clues. It's okay, I definitely made that mistake. Bluey is an Australian children's show that is currently airing. It's not based on any other pre-existing intellectual property, so it's all original, and even though it's not a musical in the same way as the Backyardigans, the music still slaps. That isn't to say that kids don't enjoy Bluey. It's been enormously successful with children and has become a staple in many households. The biggest difference is that many parents enjoy the show as much, if not more, than their children, and there are many adults with no children that adore the show's characters and storytelling. That last category includes me, because I will never grow up! This show was first brought to my attention by a friend of mine who shares a lot of the same taste in television. We were talking about our favorites when she told me her latest feel-good show was called Bluey. I assumed she was referring to a sitcom, as those are often feel-good shows, so I was very surprised when she said it was a children's cartoon. But her enthusiasm for the show was so infectious, it immediately went to the top of my list. And just, wow. The show is so genuinely good. It's wholesome, funny, educational, clever, and crude all at once. Every episode is great with amazing messages, and I definitely get feel-good vibes from it, but every so often there's an episode that hits different. Sometimes in a way that elicits joy, and other times in a way that penetrates to a deeper kind of sadness, but in a good way. And this is why a lot of adults and families have been deriving joy from the show. It's a very different approach to storytelling, and people are taking notice. I think this has to do with one very important factor, and that's how the show emphasizes the importance of play for children, for adults, and for the viewer, and how that factors into the show's narrative presentation and broader demographic appeal. And so today, I want to talk about Bluey! Australian animator Joe Broom had been working freelance for many years in children's animation. In the mid-2010s, he decided he wanted to create his own children's show for Australian children in the same way that Peppa Pig had globalized the life of children from the UK. He started by looking at his own life as a parent and began deriving inspiration from his children. In 2016, Broom completed a proof of concept and approached the Australian company Ludo to help develop the series. They then attempted to pitch the show to various networks and people in the industry, but came up against a lot of pushback. The show wasn't meant to be particularly high concept and is made with very realistic interpersonal conflicts. In fact, it comes across as much more of a slice of life than anything else, and this was seen as not particularly marketable. But Broom felt strongly that this was the point of the show, so he and his team persevered. They knew that the show they were making was different, but it had something truly important to say. A reworked pilot was presented sometime later and drew the attention of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, or ABC, who liked the emphasis on the show's Australian culture. Things like the climate, wildlife, plants, and locations were direct references to real-world places in Australia. The show was then picked up and is created and produced entirely in Australia. Broom chose to highlight the differences between characters as dog breeds, with the main family being Heelers, a breed of herding dog that is unique to Australia. The Heelers' house was designed to look like normal Australian architecture and is located outside of Brisbane in Queensland, which is the province in the northeast of Australia, because there are more places in Australia than just Sydney. All of the voices in the show are done by Australian actors, with musician David McCormick and actress and model Melanie Zanetti as the most prominent. There are some notable exceptions, with some non-Australian actors lending their voices for bit parts and cameos. Most of the child characters are voiced by children of the writers and animators, but they do an excellent job. The show is distributed by ABC to the rest of the world, but has become extremely popular thanks to its inclusion on Disney+, where you can find the first 2 seasons and most of the 3rd season, which is set to finish later this year, and a 4th season is in development. In case you haven't checked out Bluey, or still think it's a Blue's Clues reboot, and you want to see it for yourself before I ruin maybe one of the more impactful episodes, this is your spoiler warning. Bluey follows the Heeler family and focuses on their 2 young girls, the 6-year-old Bluey and the 4-year-old Bingo, as they play and learn about the world around them, usually by playing games with their dad, Bandit, and their mom, Chili, but occasionally with a wide array of other children their age or their extended family. The list of characters is extensive, but most episodes center around the Heelers in their own home, and occasionally other characters and locations appear, such as the children interacting at school or with their teacher. Every so often, there's an episode that's entirely focused on another family in the Heelers' social circle. The majority of episodes revolve around Bluey, Bingo, and whoever else might be with them, engaging in a game where their imagination is used to bring a story or scenario to life. This ranges from playing games centered around imagined versions of real-world scenarios, like pretending to be grannies taking the bus, or to pretending that magic is real.
Oh, Bingo. Pretend my hand controls your tail. Oh, okay.
This is then presented to the audience in a way where we can see the game as just everyone using their imagination to become involved and play along in order to keep the game alive. The conflict of an episode usually arises early on, and through playing the game in that episode, the children come to a conclusion about their own behavior. Although just as often, the adults also reevaluate something about their interactions through the same process. The characters usually do this while sticking to the rules of the game, and sometimes even using the game to help illustrate their revelation or apology, or in the case of Bandit, just being so fucking committed to the bit.
Hey, is all that crazy stuff still happening?
Oh, get off!
It's not up to me!
Sometimes episodes differ by placing characters in real-life situations and the hardships or lessons that come about from those unique interactions. While the show is episodic and does not have a specific watch order, it does follow a general timeline, so past events are sometimes referenced and characters do grow up. And the best part is this is all done with that uniquely Australian sense of humor that is somehow both really dry and incredibly crude at the same time. It's awesome, and all the children have adorable Aussie accents.
You're the king of fluffies.
I know how to settle this.
Yeah, whack him.
What? No. Family meeting.
Oh.
The focus of most of the episodes revolves around a specific game that the characters are playing. If it's not an imaginary scenario, then it might be a make-believe magic. But in either case, the show is primarily focused on presenting how the characters are playing throughout the episode. This is where most of the show's appeal and excellence stems from. Bluey's primary hook is that episodes are about the characters playing. Most children's shows have characters playing games in them, but this is usually broken up by whatever the focus of the episode is. But Bluey presents the conflict within the state of play. This is entirely different from the way Western society views play and the acts of play, especially in children. As a general definition, we tend to think about play as the process of occupying oneself and possibly others in an activity of amusement or recreation. And as a basic definition, this is fine. But it is also incredibly reductive, and in the case of children, possibly actively deconstructive. In the episode on Codename Kids Next Door that I just did, I highlighted scholar Carrie H. Robinson's argument that childhood is viewed in direct opposition to adulthood. In the West, we see childhood in direct opposition to adulthood. Things that define childhood and what make up that time of life are incompatible with growing up. This extends to anything associated with that time. The problem is that play is how children occupy most of their time. And as grown-ups, at least in the West, we have this idea that play is something you get to do when you don't have to do work. Because children are not expected to do labor, they are free to play. Which isn't inaccurate, but it sets a precedent that play is not work or is less valuable than work. And while children don't have to engage in the labor force, they do have to occupy themselves with the act of learning. And in Western culture, learning has become labor. Thanks, capitalism. For years, the pressure on parents to have their children perform at a certain level of academics has been omnipresent. More and more, we hear parents wanting to stimulate their children academically at younger ages by placing them in programs that stimulate speech or reading, or kickstarting numerical intelligence, or engaging children in pattern recognition, or use classical music to help make their baby smarter. This does not work. I have seen and even done some of the research. But the need for the children of our time to be more accomplished than their peers means there's a lot of pressure on children themselves to perform, but also to outperform. Children's intelligence is measured against the success of their peers.
Am I better at the monkey bars than Bingo?
To use the Marxist terms, the child's ability to learn and perform academically has become a kind of capital that they will need in the future in order to succeed over their peers. That means their time must now be filled with activities and stimulation that have the express goal of furthering their academic career. As a side effect, it also instills the idea of competition rather than cooperation. This is inadvertent but definitely subconscious in how we view learning as capital. And if you want to hear more about this, I touched on competition and Marxism in an episode I did on Monsters, Inc. But we've been pushing this ideology at younger and younger ages. But then paradoxically, we consistently tell children not to grow up too fast, to enjoy childhood. And that's bullshit. We don't get to have it both ways. And more to the point, this kind of labor-intensive learning doesn't really work. This is something that Broom understood when he created Bluey, and it's present in every episode.
Bluey, just run your own race.
Despite the constant increase in pressure on children to perform academically at earlier life stages, researchers have been publishing scholarship on the importance of play for decades. It blows my mind. The way we view play in our culture is wrong, not just because of the competitive nature of academic learning, but also because play is often where the most important learning takes place. Play is where children are given the opportunity to explore their own identity.
Here come my grannies!
Learn what's socially acceptable.
Sorry, Lucky's dad. He was born yesterday.
Yeah, also.
Engage in sympathy.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, Indy.
Understand rules.
That's why you can't change the rules. Because the rules make it fun.
And so much more. And Bluey does this all the time. I mean, clearly, I just showed a bunch of examples. Through play, children explore and mimic the world of grown-ups and grown-up identities in order to learn about the world around them. Of course, the show often has adults help the kids through their conflicts while engaging in the state of play. Look at the way Bluey's teacher Calypso checks in on all of the kids in her class while they're playing in order to direct them in the activities they choose, while subtly encouraging each of them to participate in each other's scenario. We see how the children in her class then learn to cooperate and respect each other and how social interactions take form. It's learning through play. In the groundbreaking episode Army, we're introduced to a character named Jack, who is moving schools. In the beginning of the episode, we're told that he struggles with sitting still and paying attention, as well as a few other things. But in a school that focuses on play, Calypso pairs him up with Rusty, and throughout the episode, we see that the things that Jack was struggling with are no longer an issue when he's in a state of play with Rusty, rather than forced to conform to a singular style of learning, as we usually do in regular academic classrooms. Bandit and Chili do this with Bluey and Bingo all the time, and they often use the state of play to help illustrate the lesson. But the broader lesson, I think, is that Chili and Bandit actively encourage their children to play.
What? I don't have a job.
Yeah, you do.
Really? What is it?
Making up games. Making up games is more important than you think.
Okay, Dad.
Playing games is the most important thing a child can do. It's how we learn and how we've been learning for generations. We have to be careful we don't devalue the importance of play in the lives of children. And it isn't just playing games. Unstructured play is also really important. Because of the way we try to capitalize our time, we put a lot of constraints on how and where children can play. But going out and doing risky things during play actually helps children learn more. In the episode The Creek, Bluey starts out as very nervous to be away from the playground before she starts engaging in just being in the creek.
So, what are we supposed to play?
Dunno. It's the creek. You just sort of muck around.
While she's being supervised, Bluey is still free to explore the creek and find out more about the world she lives in while engaging in unstructured play.
The creek is beautiful.
I freaking love this episode. It reminds me that it's important for not just children to get outside and play, but everyone. We view play as a thing for children to do when there's no work to be done, and so we often think about playing as something only for children, but that's simply not true.
Oh, they are playing!
See? It just looks a bit different for grown-ups.
How we play changes over time based on our interests and interactions with others, but we never lose the ability to play. We do devalue it, and because of this, we actually get worse at certain types of play. Many adults suck at using their imagination because that kind of play is frowned upon in adult society. But as Bluey shows us, the act of play can help bring us closer to our children, peers, and friends. This is an observation and not based on any scholarship, so it's just my opinion. But the biggest way we lose our ability to play is based on our lack of practice, particularly when it comes to the use of imagination. We are often told that make-believe is something for children, and so we leave it to the wayside. I think many people still want to play this way, but don't because of social pressure, and either cannot remember how to engage their imagination, or are adverse to doing so at the risk of looking childish or immature. Notice how even being viewed as childish is a bad thing because we're so at odds with childhood. But I think this is why things like improv and Dungeons & Dragons are so popular for adults right now. They're socially acceptable settings for adults to engage in imaginative play. To bring this back to Bluey, the reason people love Bandit so much is because he's an attentive father and a great role model for his kids and other dads, but also because he's so committed to playing the game. In a lot of ways, the way the characters play reminds me of improv. Their games revolve around the idea of yes and, in order to build on each other's ideas rather than tear them down. And this often leads to hilarious outcomes as characters commit and go further for the sake of the game.
What are you doing?
Nothing. Eat your floor cereal.
Okay.
When adults engage in the games on the show, they're not only capable of guiding the children around them, but they also are allowed to play. And as much as Bandit and Chili seem to dislike some of the made-up scenarios, you can tell they kind of had just as much fun as their kids. What's nice about this show as well is that other adults don't seem to judge one another. The healer's neighbor Pat often gets sucked into their shenanigans, and he plays along despite being a passerby.
Lucky Star! You have to stop Bingo!
Oh yeah, righto.
Hat heavy!
Whoa!
Oh!
This hat's heavy!
The act of playing has been relegated to the world of children and is seen as something to do outside of work time. But for both children and adults, play is an important time for bonding and learning. Maybe not about socializing for the adults, but learning about your kids and peers as individuals, and remembering that having fun is just as, if not more important as labor, and it has its own rewards.
So, did we learn anything today?
No.
Yes. These kids are awesome.
The last way Bluey shows us the importance of play is a bit more abstract. It is the act of inviting the viewer into the world of play happening on screen. Some episodes of Bluey open up with the Healer family already in character. The episode Bus has Bluey and Bingo as the grannies again, and Bandit as a bus driver, and Chili as a passenger who's secretly in love with the driver. The episode never told us any of this, but we're invited to watch the scenario play out as a form of being part of the family having fun. In some episodes, one of the healers has some kind of magic, like a feather wand, or a magical piece of asparagus, or the power to make people do what they want. In these episodes, the viewer is invited to play along with the characters, but not in the creepy Dora the Explorer way where she stares at you with those lifeless eyes waiting for you to respond. There's no real magic happening in Bluey, but through the characters' commitment to play, we, the viewer, understand that this is all happening because the characters are playing along and we get to play along with them. We know that Bluey can't do magic because we've seen her ask Bingo to pretend to do what she asked, so there's no actual stakes involved. And yet, because of the commitment to play and our willingness to play along, we get an episode where the characters use awesome magical powers. This is my favorite episode, by the way. This kind of narrative play where the audience is involved is actually pretty meta. For a show that's supposed to be a slice of life, this is kind of high concept. It means there is a narrative being presented that is fictional inside of what is already a fictional show. And I think Bluey knows that its audience can handle that. It makes careful allusions to show that this isn't really happening, but I think this also helps younger viewers understand, and children are incredibly capable of figuring out what is happening. But that sort of begs the question, is this show actually for children? In many past episodes of This Is a Thing, while talking about children's shows, I've often asked the question, who is this movie for? That usually comes about because a show or movie is presented as for children but has distinctly adult themes. But in this case, Bluey knows exactly who it's for. And the answer is not children, and it's not adults either. It's both. Bluey is designed purposefully to be a child-parent watching experience. In the same way that Calypso leads her class through conflict and experiences, Bluey is made so that episodes are easy enough to understand on the surface, but have deeper lessons and themes that parents are encouraged to talk about with their children. In the episode Onesies, Chili's sister Brandy comes to visit. We discover that Brandy hasn't seen Bluey and Bingo for 4 years and has been distant, but has brought onesies for her nieces. Bluey is sad that she didn't get the cheetah onesie because it doesn't fit. By the end of the episode, Bluey learns to accept that she can't always get what she wants and needs to learn to live with it. A good lesson for kids. But throughout the episode, we also learn that the reason Brandy hasn't visited in 4 years is because she can't get what she wants.
There's something Auntie Brandy wants more than anything as well. But she can't have it. And there's not really anything anyone can do.
For the adults watching, it's heavily implied that Brandy wants children, but for whatever reason, cannot have them. Some children may pick up on this and ask questions to their parents. This then gives the parents the opportunity to draw a parallel between Bluey not getting the onesie she wanted and Brandy's distance and how she has come to accept the way things are and why that might be really hard. Something similar happens in the episode Double Babysitter, where Bluey is scared to have a babysitter put her to bed because she's had one bad experience. This is drawn in direct parallel to Bluey's babysitter Frisky having a bad breakup. Both of them need to learn that one bad experience doesn't reflect on how the future will go. The difference in this episode is that the parallel is being drawn in reverse for the adult audience's sake rather than for the child's. We know that one bad babysitting experience is not indicative of the rest, but a bad breakup can feel like none of them will ever work. But Bluey trusts her babysitters, and Frisky appears to open up to the idea of trying again.
But how can I know for sure it won't happen again?
You can't, but you have to give it a go anyway.
The show also has episodes directed at Bandit and Chili learning lessons at the same time as their kids. In Yoga Ball, while playing with Bluey and Bingo, Bandit doesn't realize he's being too rough with Bingo.
Oh, Bingo, really? Oh, sorry, Buster, I didn't realize.
Or in the episode Whale Watching, Bandit and Chili realize that they should engage their children even when they're not feeling well because it's what's best for their children. This episode is particularly good because it's heavily implied that they're hung over and then they get guilted into doing the right thing by a whale documentary featuring Natalie Portman.
There's nothing a whale mom wouldn't do for her children.
When people talk about shows or movies written for the whole family, they often refer to movies meant for children with some good storytelling and jokes for the adults. But this show doesn't make that kind of distinction. The story and humor are directed at the whole family without being bifurcated. I think we're so used to this partitioned way of storytelling that we didn't even know a unified narrative trajectory was even possible. At least I didn't. Of course, children probably won't read as deep as the adults, but the show doesn't cheapen its themes because of that. Despite being marketed as a children's show, Bluey is the only show I've ever seen that is written specifically for both children and adults. It makes the show feel very real because situations are often about both adults and children learning, and that neither party is correct all the time. We all have things that we can learn, and understanding that Bandit and Chili are just as flawed as Bingo and Bluey can help keep us humble as parents or just people in general, and remind us that everyone makes mistakes. Bluey is a show that many adults and children have fallen in love with. The show depicts an appreciation for learning through play, the importance of play in a child's development, and in a grown-up's well-being. It asks its audience to play along and engage on their own. And it does this while reminding us that we all have things that we can learn about growing up, about being parents, about how to be better people, and how to appreciate play at any age or stage. I'm not a parent, but I love this show. It teaches lessons and depicts learning as an ongoing process that goes hand in hand with play. In one episode, the show even breaks the fourth wall and asks Bluey if she is a puppet. I think this is to help the audience understand that the characters in the show are representations of everyone, that no matter how heavy things get, and in some episodes they get real heavy, there are people out there who care and that we all deserve to be able to engage in fun. And that is why Bluey is so much more than just a children's show. Here are my stray thoughts. Any of the episodes where the characters play around with some kind of magic and everyone commits to it are usually my favorites, although I do like how they occasionally have episodes about exploring grown-up events through the eyes of a child like a sporting event. I love how the show is so Aussie and actually takes place in Brisbane where my brother went to school. Can we just talk about how good this show looks? Look at those water graphics! My favorite character is Mackenzie because of his boundless energy and also because he's a Kiwi and New Zealand is my second home. Hey! Thanks so much for watching that episode on Bluey, which might just be the single greatest television show ever made for the entire family. It is absolutely incredible. If you enjoyed that video, remember to give it a like and subscribe so you'll never miss anything else going on right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.